For many years now, Russ and Craig have had many wide-ranging conversations with folks from all over the gaming world. This is one of those conversations.
D6G, the Lost Chapter.
Welcome back to Dunkin' Donuts. And Craig, who's that guy in the corner over there?
I don't know, but he looks tired.
He does look tired. I
smell. Is
it future?
Something German. I can't remember.
No, is it future Steven or past Steven?
Oh my God, it's clone Steven.
It's Steven Buonocore. How you doing, sir?
Oh, hey guys, how you doing?
From Stronghold Games. Are you getting some caffeine for your big trip to Essen?
Oh,
from Dunks here?
Guys, I gotta gear up for this. Wait, is this future Steven or past Steven?
No, it's past.
Have I been there yet? Or have I
you have not been there yet.
Okay, I'll make it sure.
Yeah.
All right,
you are currently past Steven.
You tell me. We don't know. You're time traveling.
I don't know who I am.
All right.
Yeah.
So what are you enjoying
time
today?
Will do that to you.
What are you enjoying from Dunkin' Donuts? What's your favorite coffee you order from Dunks?
Oh well, I'm not a big Dunkin' Donuts coffee fan. See, I love robust coffees, like really big coffee. So I kind of like the Starbucks, French roast. And I'm actually a big Sumatra fan.
Ooh, wow!
I don't want to diss the fact that I'm here. Don't tell the people in Starbucks in Dunkin' Donuts.
So you don't get the coffee here. Do you eat the donuts though?
If I do, which is not healthy for me.
No,
chocolate donuts. I do have an affinity for Dunkin' Donuts chocolate donuts. Yes.
Well, that sounds excellent. So grab a chocolate donut, grab a chair here, and we're gonna. It's time for another book club, Craig.
Yes, we need to sit down and discuss.
Once in a while, in the Lost Chapters, we like to have a little book club. But we like to talk about something we've read, and Craig and I both.
Wait, guys! Guys! I just started this book.
Would you?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah! I just started this book. It's called Leviathan Wakes.
Yes.
Expanse Series.
Yes.
S.A. Corey.
Yes.
You ordered that?
I just opened the first page and I'm about to start reading. I read the first sentence on the first page.
All right. Well,
are you about to talk about that?
We're going to spoil the entire thing for you right now.
Awesome. I love spoilers.
Yes, we are. We're gonna ruin the entire story. So here's the thing. So
you'll never want to walk into another Dunkin' Donuts again.
Never. So if you have not yet read the Expanse series
by James S.A. Corey, we obviously loved it, or we wouldn't be talking.
We did. We loved it in the show. It's one of my favorite sci-fi series. I really, really enjoy it. It lived up to all of my expectations after reading the first book. And the question is, so if you have not read that series and you plan to read it someday, stop now.
Yes.
Come back to this.
All that is holy.
Come back to this after you've read it, and then it's like being with your friends at book club, talking about and listening to what people thought of the different characters and what happened. It'll be fun. If you never plan to read the book and just want to hear Craig and I talk about something at random, much like Mr. Buonocore here, then you can hang around and listen. But hopefully it'll make some sense.
No, wait. I plan on reading the book, but since I'm so old, I'm going to forget everything that was said tonight, and I'm going to.
Well, that also works. That's fine. That's a fine.
Sounds like a plan.
There you go. And I can heckle you guys as and ask stupid questions.
Right.
So it's
that sounds like a plan too.
So, Craig, what's the basic? So, is this thing? This is a pretty new series, right?
This is a very new series, Russ. The Expanse Series, the first book, which, as Stephen just said, is Leviathan Wakes, came out in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And then the sequel came out in 2012. Yeah. And then the final book in this original trilogy, which was Abaddon's Gate, came out just a couple months ago in 2013.
Yes. So it just wrapped up the trilogy, and we really enjoyed, obviously, all three books.
Absolutely. And it's by James S.A. Corey, which is actually a pen name for a writing team of Daniel Abraham, who I just learned is actually George R.R. Martin's assistant.
Ooh.
Which is intriguing.
Perhaps he should assist Mr. Martin in how...
Yeah, he doesn't do that job very well.
I was just about to make a joke about George R.R. Martin. Like, he cannot finish his books, yet this guy is his assistant.
Well, now we know why. His assistant is writing awesome sci-fi books.
Right.
That is
he actually also writes fantasy books. And the other guy is Ty Frank, and I believe these are his first books. And a little trivia where the name comes from. James is Daniel Abraham's middle name. Corey is Ty Frank's middle name. And S.A. are Abraham's daughter's initials.
There you go.
Intriguing.
Neat.
And just so we can place this for you in the world of geekdom and how big the Expanse actually is. Just last month, what's his name? The Variety, the magazine Variety, announced that the Expanse has been optioned for a TV series.
Yes.
And the writers of Iron Man signed on to write the pilot.
Awesome.
And their quote was, "The Expanse will be an hour-long sci-fi drama with elements of a detective procedural, centering on a cover-up of the discovery of alien life." The company that's making it said it's developing the project in direct-to-series fashion, so it's not even looking at movie options, which makes sense considering the sprawling story arc that it's dealing with.
Yeah, they could do this like B5 and just do the entire story arc in like a 5-season arc.
That'd
be awesome. Yeah.
Wow.
Awesome.
Now you really got. I'm serious. Now I'm turning.
Yeah, I'm telling you, this is a
maybe
good.
I'm gonna hang up now because I want to watch.
This is a good sci-fi franchise. It really is.
It is. So now let's talk. Because we're not here to tell you the story of the book,
nor summarize the plot. We're gonna analyze.
Give you enough to talk, like to understand what we're talking about.
Right.
But mainly, we want to talk about the book itself. So
and debate things.
Exactly. So first, Russ, let's talk about the politics of the whole series.
Yes.
Right. There's different groups that are.
Well,
that are
we should clear. It takes place entirely in our solar system.
It does. Yes.
Well, mostly, except for the very end. So it's really it's really a sci-fi version of the universe where faster than light travel does not exist.
Nope.
They've got a drive system that's fast enough to get you from Earth to Mars in a reasonable amount of time, or even to the asteroid belt.
Which I love, as a side note, how that was discovered, and it's named for the guy who discovered it, but he discovered it by accident in a yacht, and he launched it, and his ship launched, and he was never seen again.
Right. So there's three main political factions, not counting the corporations. There's Earth, there's Mars, and there's the Belters, or collectively folks known as the Belt.
Which are the outer planets and the asteroid belts.
And the Belters are that loose confederation of an alliance of people who mostly want to be left alone but are dealing with the politics of the inner planets. And then you have Earth and Mars, the two big governmental powerhouses, which are now roughly on equal political and military footing, roughly.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
Yep.
And so the main characters, these are the characters that exist through the majority of the story. And would you say James Holden is the main character?
At times, depending on the series, it turns out that when you get to the last book, I think it's clear that James Holden is a huge chunk of the story arc.
Right.
Kind of like if you look at Star Wars and say, well, the entire 6 films are about the redemption of Anakin Skywalker, yet in certain movies Vader's is not a major character besides being a villain. You know what I mean? But
I would say this is much more in line with, yes, he's a main character than Darth Vader.
Yes, right. That's what I mean. So James Holden is a primary character, but there are times when especially in the second book where I felt he was getting overshadowed by the people, but it's still but it's defined by him. Yeah, intriguing. Yes.
So James Holden, who is your average run of the mill outsider, no matter where he is, and he's the captain of what becomes basically the ship that the story starts revolving around.
And James Holden has an interesting character flaw.
Yes.
Well, I don't know if it's a character. It's debatable whether it's a flaw or not. But basically, he has this ideology that basically states that people will be better off if the entire universe knows about a secret or an issue.
Secrets are bad.
Secrets are bad, and we're better just blasting those secrets out to the entire known universe. So in the first book, this is sort of when this happens, and then as you go along, he becomes sort of his trademark, and in many ways gets him in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, well, it also killed millions of people.
And kills millions of people, but it could arguably also save people, so it's hard to, you got to weigh that all out. But yeah, so there's an interesting sort of political question throughout the entire book is, are you better off, using government cover-ups to protect the people, or is it better off that everybody just knows as much as they can and let everybody work it out amongst themselves, which may involve people shooting each other?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
And so James Holden has as his central spaceship, which I think is awesome, and I don't think it can be argued that it's one of the coolest sort of central space. I would put it with Firefly and the Millennium Falcon, Serenity and the Millennium Falcon. It is whereas those two are transport ships, His ship is called the Rosinante, which is awesome because that is the name of whose horse? Oh, I'm drawing a blank. It's the only thing I didn't write. Don Quixote.
Yes.
So that's the idealist who's tilting at windmills and bemoaning the passage of a grander time period.
Right. Yeah, good catch on that one.
It's very, very cool. It's also the name of a spaceship in a rock song that happens to be one of the author's favorite rock songs, and I can't remember whose song it is. But so anyway, so it used to be a Russian gunship, and they accidentally end up on it in the middle of this big battle. And they're not stealing it. They're literally trying to escape from this battleship that's exploding around them, and that's the only way they can get out. But then they end up keeping it.
They keep it as salvage. We also should mention that James Holden is an Earther.
Yes, he is.
And the interesting little backstory here is on Earth, populations have become so large that children have multiple parents.
In some
cultures.
Communities.
And so he's from Minnesota, which is where apparently they do that. So he's always talking about, every once in a while they mention like, my mom's plural or mama this or mama that. It's kind of interesting. They never really explain it all in great detail, but it's kind of neat to hear him reflect on that thing and compare and contrast his childhood to the other members of the crew who we're about to talk about, who are all from different kind of walks of life.
Exactly. I think one of the many things that they do well in this book is point up all of the differences sociologically from our time period, because you can see there's all sorts of different family groupings that are completely accepted, although some people do look strangely at him when he talks about his moms and dads.
Right.
And it's not so much it's more like he lives on a commune and he calls everybody his moms and dads.
Right.
So he's the captain now of the Rosinante. His XO, who is never a point of view character but is always important, is named Naomi Nagata. She's of African descent, but she's a belter.
Yes.
And now talk a little bit, Russ, about how belters look different from everybody else.
Well, because belters are born and raised in microgravity, they're taller, they're thinner, they're in very much lower Gs. Even when they're on space stations, they're not usually
and they look a lot like Russ because they have big heads.
Yes, they're not usually even pulling a full G, even on space stations, right?
No, exactly.
So because of that, they're taller, they're thinner, they're not as and also what's interesting about belters is that because they're often in spacesuits communicating, a lot of the gestures or a lot of shrugs and things are instead hand signals.
Right.
So they do a great job of this with the book. Like they'll shrug with their hand or they'll make the motion to nod because you can't see a nodding space helmet kind of thing.
Right.
So all this little subtle. So really a lot of great subtle stuff that kind of gives you the cultural feel of the different factions.
Yep. And rounding out the crew, because they're not like super important, but they're awesome characters. Alex is the pilot of the ship, and he's a Martian, which is intriguing because most of the people who end up on Mars, or many of them, are from Asia, and so they have Asian features. But for some reason, the people who live in the section of Mars where Alex comes from, they all affect a Texas accent.
They're all Texans, right?
So they're Asians with Texas accents from Mars, which is awesome. Because the way that the writers build that, you never go, well, that's weird. You're just like totally like, oh yeah, no, I totally get why that would happen.
It works just as well as like everybody in Firefly speaks Chinese once in a while. It's just sort of, it's just an accepted sort of, okay, I get that, and they explain it just enough for you to care and accept it, but not enough where you got all roped into 50 pages of how that happened. It's,
exactly.
You gotta wonder if they're going to actually put that into the TV series.
I hope so.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could easily do it with just having him have an accent,
right?
Yeah.
And then the last character on the ship itself is Amos, and he's the engineer. He's also the weapon master. He also happens to be a sociopathic killer, but you don't know that till later.
Yeah,
right?
What's interesting about Amos is he's an Earther also, but he's got a very different background. So whereas James Holden is from the wholesome, Midwest of Earth, which is still wholesome Midwest, just family structure is different than it is today, but it's still that, country feel. Amos is from Baltimore, I believe, right?
Yes.
And
but
city. You don't know it in the first book, but by the end of his backstory gets developed. Now
it's very dark.
No one's backstory, I don't think, is ever fully revealed. They've still got room in the coming books and in the series to even flesh it out more, which really speaks highly of this book, where they don't have to do that because, as I mentioned before, once in a while the book will just shoot off and talk about another person for 4 or 5 chapters, not even on this crew.
Right.
So, but Amos, you start to find out, has a very dark past, was involved in either, I don't remember if they exactly clear up what it was, child pornography or child slavery.
It was child sex slavery.
Yeah, child sex slavery, right. So he was involved in that, and because of that...
Not as a bad guy
no.
It, as a
child. He was a victim of that.
Oh.
And so what happened was he becomes very... He's an interesting character because he's this really sort of laid-back military dude who's like, almost got your back. He's like James Holden's Chewbacca almost, right?
Yeah.
And he feels like that kind of lovable, cuddable fuzzball, but every once in a while, certain things will happen that reveal his dark side.
Yeah.
And he just doesn't, and when that happens, law doesn't matter to him anymore. He's just like, nope, we're going to, like if a kid's in trouble, he doesn't matter what's going down, that kid's going to be saved by Amos. You know, it's like that's the kind of thing.
And if somebody has done something bad to a child or to have victimized somebody, he'll just fly off and kill them all of a sudden. And we needed to question that guy, and he's like, "Sorry,
my bad. The guy was a jerk.
Wasn't going to happen."
Yeah, and that's funny because Amos has almost always got, and he's the second strongest fighter. Well, he's arguably the strongest fighter in the ship, or James and he are equal in a gunfight, roughly.
Right.
James Holden, he is. But what happens? So they're always back to back. Whereas the rest of the crew, Alex is the pilot, Naomi's the engineer. But these two are the guys that are always in the front line fighting, and they always get each other's back. And Amos is always there for James. But once in a while, that one thing happens where you just lose control of Amos, and he's on his own planet.
Yep. Which is awesome.
Yeah, it is cool.
So that's the crew of the Rosinante.
Yep.
And now you've got Joe Miller, who is a character through all 3 books, despite the fact that at the end of book 1, what happens?
Well, he's dead.
He dies.
He's dead, Jim Holden.
Nice.
But what's interesting about Joe Miller, and this is what's interesting about the book, is from time to time, especially in the first book, it's hard to determine if the primary character is James Holden or Joe Miller.
I would say in the first book, they're evenly cast.
And by the third book, Joe Miller, even though he's dead, is of equal importance in many ways to Jim Holden. Whereas in the second book, Joe Miller's on the back burner and very rarely because he's dead.
Yeah.
But it's a really, so he's, and what makes this cool too is what I liked about the Joe Miller character was he is your quintessential, gumshoe, private eye cop, right?
This is where the cop procedural element of the TV show is going to come
in. So in the very first book, it's almost like a sci-fi gumshoe show. It's almost like an old pulp detective story in a very believable near future. I say near future because it's only our solar system. It's a reasonably near future sci-fi event. So he's a really cool character. I love how he is. I love how he acts. I love the journey and evolution of him as he goes from gumshoe to getting in trouble politically and losing his job to a mercenary to clinging to this one mission, which was to find this one girl. It becomes his whole world because it's all he has left after his life crumbles around him.
Right, exactly, which was an awesome side plot. Another thing that these guys do awesomely is these side plots that become as rich and as entangling mentally for you, emotionally, as the reader, as the main plots that are going on.
Right.
So you mentioned he's looking for a girl. What's that girl's name, Russ?
So Julie Mao.
Who, again, also dead. Actually dead almost from the beginning.
She's pretty much dead from the get-go.
Is still through the entire book.
Right. She's the opening. She's the opening scene. Yep. And what's interesting about the first book is you have this opening scene where this girl, Julie Mao, is on the ship, and there's some kind of weird alien life form, sort of like virus thing there that's infecting people and turning them into goo and then repurposing their biomass into something else.
Yep.
And it's the only part this happens, and Julie's involved, and she's like, "Oh my god!" And then it cuts away, and you don't know really what happens there. And then it's sort of like this normal sci-fi universe where there aren't any strange aliens or anything for a long time.
For a very long time.
And you're not even really sure. You're like, it's almost like at the very beginning of Game of Thrones where there's like White Walkers and magic, and then it's gone for like a book and a half.
Yeah.
Like there's no evidence of magic anywhere. And all of a sudden, oh wait, there is magic. I forgot about that intro. That's sort of the same thing here where it's like self-contained, political intrigue in the solar system. Oh my God, that's right. That alien mentioned on page 10's back, kind of thing.
Yep. And so that's Julie Mao. And then the last of the characters that go through all the whole story arc would be Fred Johnson.
I love Fred.
Who is an awesome character because he's an Earther.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, he was the Earther. He was the commander of a military unit that was sent when the Belters first started to rebel. Mm-hmm. Fred Johnson was the commander of the Marine unit that was sent in to crush the rebellion at Anderson Station. And he is now known as the Butcher of Anderson Station.
Yes.
because, well, when you go into a civilian station and you start blowing the bulkheads, everybody's going to die.
Right.
And now, in an interesting twist, and that's another cool thing about this whole universe they've created, is that these loyalties are constantly shifting as characters evolve. Fred Johnson is now basically the leader, as you find out in later books. He's the leader of the OPA, which is the Outer Planets Alliance,
right?
Who starts off as terrorists and end up as the legitimate government of the Belt.
It's basically the Belter government, which they didn't really have one before the OPA. So,
exactly. Yeah. So those are your main characters.
Yep.
Now,
love Fred.
Fred's awesome.
Yeah.
And now in conflict to these guys, you've got the bad guys. You've got big government. You have the monolithic government of Earth that wants to control everything, and they want to control Mars, and they want to control the Belt. Then you've got Mars, who's much smaller, but they're more technically advanced, and they want to be independent from Earth, and they are through a lot of political machinations, and then the fact that they've got a more technologically advanced Navy. They're independent of Earth. And then you have the terrorists / political activists of the OPA. Those are the government people. Then you've got big business who, and usually this kind of makes me roll my eyes, and I'm like, oh yes, we're in the era of the big business is always going to be the bad guy. But this is done so well, I'm just like, okay, fine. In the first book, you've got the company Protogen, and they're the ones that they have found this alien
protomolecule,
and they're trying to repurpose it for a variety of reasons because they don't know really what it is or what it does, and they're totally evil and unethical. And then what?
What's interesting about it is, go ahead, finish your thought, and I'll jump back in.
Well, okay, and then I would say Mao Kwiatkowski, who kind of owns Protogen but disavows them at the end of book 1. Then you find out in book 2 they were in it all along, and now they're trying to weaponize it. So. Right. And they're going to sell it to the highest bidder, even though once it's proven in the field, you know you can't actually control it. Once you launch it, it's basically going to kill everybody.
Yeah.
So give me the argument against them being evil.
Well, no, it's not. Well, they are. I mean, they're definitely the bad guys in the first book, or they're the perceived bad guys. But what's interesting about this whole thing is you're not really sure in the first book who really the good guys and the bad guys are. Even to the point where I mentioned earlier where James Holden sort of figures out, okay, this company Protogen has got this protomolecule and they're infecting stuff. Yeah. And that's bad. So the way I'm going to deal with this bad thing is I'm going to tell everybody they're doing it. So he broadcasts it out. And things start happening and you're realizing maybe that wasn't the best way to handle that situation. And then Protogen is in it for the money, but at the same time, they're kind of like, well, could we... you don't know in the beginning, are they doing it for the human race? Are they trying to they're trying to make a buck, but are they making a buck in the way that like a company that cures cancer makes a buck, or are they making it in a way that's just totally wrong? It turns out that Mao and Protogen was pretty much on the wrong side of the tracks. But you don't know that in the beginning, right? You're not really sure.
And it's funny because the moment you know that, Joe Miller goes off the reservation and shoots the guy in the head that tells him.
Right. And then the other thing that happens is that because a lot of these things have this journey from good guy to good guy, or bad guy to good guy to bad guy, or you never really know. And the protomolecule itself is the same thing throughout this story arc, right? Because in the beginning, it's thought that it's some kind of weaponized invention that was fired in our solar system, however bajillion many years ago.
This is what Protogen thinks.
Right.
Actually, you only find this out in the third book.
Well, no.
That's what it really.
In
Protogen thinks it was a weapon that was launched into our solar system.
And so does everybody. Does I mean Jim Holden does it? They're all thinking it's a weapon that's fired in the system. And the thing that makes Protogen the bad guy is they've found this alien weapon which didn't hit Earth and turn it into something else, and instead got stuck in a frozen moon around Jupiter, or whatever it was.
I think it was Jupiter. Yeah.
And so they have said, well, fine, we're going to experiment with this alien weapon and see what we can do with it. And that's what makes them look evil, because you're freaking playing with a weapon that was designed to kill humanity. But that assumption...
Actually, to kill Earth before humanity even existed.
To wipe out our solar system, take control of our life, our evolutionary process. Yeah. But in actuality, what you find later is, maybe that wasn't really the goal of the protomolecule. You don't really know what the goal of the protomolecule was. And these aliens might necessarily have been bad guys. So, but at the end of but go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say that. I mean, the argument, another argument why Protogen is so evil is because they don't know what it is. So what they've decided to do is they just release it on Eros, the moon. Eros is an asteroid. Eros, which is a space station, basically dug into the rock of Eros, and there's over 1 million people living there, and it melts them all down. Yeah. And uses their biomass, And Julie Mao is actually in there, and it's been using her consciousness sort of as an interface with humanity. And so she's kind of in there, and that's what's going on. And they basically sacrifice, and they put their guards in there, and they know what's going on, and they put cameras in there so they can watch what happens when all the people start to mutate. And they've got a secret base that they're doing all of this from. And so Protogen is literally just sacrificing like 1.5 million people just to see what this weapon or what this thing will do to them.
And of course, the end of the first book, Jim Holden and
Joe
Miller managed to get to the station and basically shoot it off into Venus, to crash into Venus instead of crashing into Earth. Yeah.
No.
Know what happened?
No, that's not what happened. What happened was Earth and Mars both launched a bunch of nukes at it.
Oh, right.
And the OPA launched whatever the heck that generation ship is.
Yeah.
The giant Mormon generation ship.
Right.
And they yes, there's a cool thing, a cool little side story going on is that a huge group of Mormons has decided that mankind has completely just defiled this this solar system, and they want to go off and find a new one. So they have found what they think is a planet that's going to support life, and they've created this enormous mile-long spaceship called the Nauvoo. Mm-hmm. And the Nauvoo is just this huge generation ship, and they literally will. The Mormons are planning on living on this ship the way it's designed, and you learn all about it in book 3. And they're going to launch it at that star, and it's going to take hundreds of years to get there, and they're all going to live out generations on this starship. But it's being built by the OPA because they have. Obviously, they're the best ones at building spaceships and space stations, and so they've got the best technology. So the Mormons commissioned them to build it, and then Fred Johnson is like, well, forget this. We're not going to let Eros, because Eros does start to go towards Earth. Right. So Fred Johnson's like, well, we're not going to let it happen. So they just put this enormous nickel nose on the end of the Nauvoo and just launch it at Eros, and they're going to destroy it by hitting it with Eros. And then Eros jinx.
Right.
And the Nauvoo just shoots right by it. They're like, oh, God, now we've lost this giant spaceship. And it's racing towards Earth. And Joe Miller thinks that he's going to be able to convince Julie Mao, whose intellect right now, whose consciousness is directing it, convince her not to crash on Earth, but he needs time. So Joe Miller's like, Fred, whatever. Oh, God.
Fred Johnson.
All these names, Fred Johnson.
Right.
Says, okay, I can stop the nuclear missiles, but you guys are going to owe me something. And so Holden, it makes the deal because he's got the only non-Eros sample left alive of the protomolecule, and says, I'll give you the last sample of it as long as you promise not ever to use it and get rid of these missiles. So they do their tricks and they blow up all the missiles, or actually they trap all the missiles so that they can collect them later. And that gives Joe Miller the chance to talk or interface with Julie Mao and convinces her to hit Venus instead of Earth.
Right. Yeah, I was just going to skip all that, but you're right. That all happens too.
It's all cool stuff, man.
It is cool stuff. So
you guys are convincing me to start.
Oh, it's awesome. So the book crashes so they crash this giant thing into Venus, and it's not destroyed. It sort of lands into Venus and starts pulsing down there and doing something.
Right.
So that's it. Now Joe Miller goes in. Riding the thing down.
He can't escape in time.
Right,
so
right into
Holden escapes, and Joe Miller is on the Eros.
Who's a major character in the first book, I would say equal in importance and stature to Holden, dies at the end of the first book riding the station into Venus.
Yeah.
So he sacrifices himself, which is pretty cool for his character development because he's this guy who's like down and out and doesn't even sure he has any value anymore, blah, blah, blah. He doesn't save Julie Mao, but he basically saves Earth. So
right.
That's
and
awesome.
he's kind of like quote unquote with Julie Mao as they write it down too.
Right.
So he's kind of like giving her comforting the human element of her psyche as they crash into Venus.
Yeah. So that's the first book.
Yeah.
And then so Craig, at the end of the first book, like how did you feel about the series? What were you thinking?
I thought it was awesome because it wasn't like a George R.R. Martin main character death. Mm-hmm. It was like a character death where you were like, oh man, like that death had meaning.
Well, it was coming too. You kind of could see it coming. I thought
it was not out of character for him to do what he did.
Right.
By the time he did it, it would have been at the beginning, which is also awesome character development.
Right.
because it would have been, when he's like, oh, I'm just a gumshoe working with all my other gumshoe friends here, and blah blah blah, and then they just do such a great job of isolating him, and you're not enough of a belter, so you're getting like he loses his job in the big upheaval when the OPA goes legit, sort of. And so I really liked the end of the first book.
Yeah.
How about you?
I loved the end of the first book, and I liked. Fortunately for me, I read the first book when the second book was already out.
Yeah, as did I.
So I jumped right into the second book without even thinking about it. Yeah. But I loved it, and I was really on the edge of my seat to see what was going to happen in Venus. So they did a great job of having a nice, clean, self-contained story, which could have ended there and been like, "There's this mystery, what's going on in Venus?" But you definitely wanted to see what was going to happen next.
Right, because almost immediately upon impacting with Venus, the protomolecule starts doing something, but the clouds of Venus hide exactly what it's doing. So nobody knows what it's doing, but whatever it is immediately covers the entire surface of Venus.
Right.
And that brings us to book 2, which is Caliban's War.
Yes.
Which we can go through a little less detail because I think the character development stuff is cooler with this book.
Well, they did a cool thing with this book.
Yeah.
So Stephen, just to make this extra cool, in case you already aren't sold on this series, my favorite part of Caliban's War is in the first book, the book's primarily around 2 cool things you learn about this universe. One is how spaceships work, because you got Holden's crew flying their spaceship. You see them in the galley all the time. You see them tweaking their engines. You see them firing weapons. You see them dodging combat, right? All that stuff's happening. You see stealth mode and hard to find and all that stuff, how big capital ships fight, all that's in there. You also got the gumshoe, how the police system works, how the governments work. Caliban's War brings the universe up a notch into 2 other areas they haven't really explored. First of all, you get this new character who's a UN politician.
Yeah.
Love her character.
Avasarala
is fantastic.
Yeah.
Love her character.
She is so foul-mouthed.
Love her attitude. You get this image of sort of an older woman who has been in the UN forever. There's all these political games going on. She knows them all. She describes it as like a giant chess match all the time with these pieces moving there, and she's getting outmaneuvered, but then she's outmaneuvering other people. You got all that going on. So you figure out the UN politics of that and how that all works. That's basically Earth. But also, you get right into the mind of one of my favorite characters in all 3 books, and she only appears in the second book, and that is Bobby Draper.
Yeah.
I love her. She's a Martian Marine.
She's awesome.
And they introduce right in the beginning of the second book how power armor works in this universe.
Yeah.
So you've got fully power armored space Marines, or Martian Marines. I know. So she's got awesome power armor, yet right in the opening of this book, she's in the power armor fighting on this moon, and all of a sudden there's this weird alien construct coming at him that just really can't be stopped. And these guys are bad arse. I mean, they do a great job of describing the idea that these suits are so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
And what's
You're
even
like
better,
a tank.
it's even better because you see in the third book they even reinforce how awesome these suits are again. Yeah. And I just love her character, and I love the idea that in this book it was like 2 other aspects of the universe. Holden's still flying around, but you know how the Rossi works now, right? You know how that goes on. Fred Johnson, the OP are still there. You know their deal now, though. Now you're learning the inner politics of Mars and how the Marines work, and you're learning the inner politics of the UN and how Earth really works.
Yep.
Which is just great. And then you've got in the first book, you had the soul searching of Miller. In this book, you have the soul-wrenching situation of Prax and his daughter.
Which
right?
is great.
Which is just, you're right from the beginning, there's this, the whole alliance has to fall apart because there's this issue that happens on this moon. Ganymede. And there's tensions have always been high in Ganymede.
Which is the breadbasket of the outer planets.
Right. So the tensions are high between Earth and Mars there, and this alien thing that we presume comes from Venus, but we don't really know at this point, jumps out and attacks the Martians, and everybody assumes Earth attacked Mars, and all of a sudden it starts to fire.
It's actually killing all the Earth guys.
Oh, Earth guys, right.
And the Martian guys are guarding their own little garden dome, and they're going like, what's going on over on that Earth dome? Right. And they see the Earth Marines running towards them, and they're like, oh, we're going to be fighting. And they realize that the Earth guys aren't shooting at them, and they're like,
running
what's going on? Wait, they're shooting behind them. What's happening? Right. And then this just big giant hulking thing shows up and just starts killing the Earth guys, and the Martians are like, holy crap, and they start trying to kill it and trying to save the Earth Marines. And there's this really cool moment where like it's like everybody together fighting this thing, and because of what happened, then the fleets in orbit don't know what's going on. They think the Marines are fighting each other, and they start launching missiles, and the whole place.
So Ganymede basically falls apart, which just completely destabilizes politically the Earth and Martian relations.
Yeah.
And it pisses off the OPA because, again, it's the breadbasket of the outer planet. So now you've just screwed the OPA and you've screwed Earth and Mars all in one scene, and everything goes from this mostly okay and reasonably balanced situation at the end of book 1 to the delicate balance is totally blown apart right in the beginning of book 2.
Yeah.
Nice.
Which is why you've got Caliban's War now going on.
Yeah, and it's awesome.
And it's just awesome.
And as Russ said, Prax and May, Praxidius, I think is that his name, his full name?
Yeah.
And he's a scientist, and he lives on Ganymede. And he's just like he's a science wonk. He doesn't care about. He's very socially awkward. He's a little botanist, and that's all he cares about. And he has this daughter, and he's got this ex-wife that left him, and the daughter, which is always kind of wrenching. And you've always kind of think, oh wow, that's not a nice person. And later on, you find out she's not. And then she gets kidnapped, and you don't know why. She's got a very rare disease. And this book sort of revolves around. Sort of parallels the first book in that there's a search again for a girl, but this time, instead of a girl in her 20s, it's this little girl that's been kidnapped at the very beginning of the book. So you've got the universe, the solar system is collapsing around them. This war is exploding. You've got this Marine. You've got Bobby, who's like the sole survivor of her whole unit, and she's trapped behind enemy lines. Basically, ends up with the crew of the Rosie for most of the book. And you've got this scientist guy who's just desperately looking for his daughter. And at the same time, you've got the political intrigue that Russ brought in. You've got the corporate intrigue because now Jules Mao Quick comes out as the guy, the real mastermind behind the original stuff that was going on. So he's now in prison.
Well, we should say, too, the other thing that's a really cool twist right in the beginning of this book is, so you see this alien biomass thing attacking the Marines, and while that's happening, they're saying they're reading some kind of energy signature from Venus.
Yes.
So now you're like, oh, crap. Remember, we've been all conditioned that in book 1, this alien thing was sent from outer space to invade the solar system and take us over. And here it is on Venus now, building something, God knows what. Oh, and by the way, it's controlling life forms over here on Ganymede, taking us out. It must have launched it to Ganymede. It did all this stuff. But then you realize, oh, no.
Yeah.
Actually, this poor guy's daughter that he's trying to find, May, she is part of a small group of kids being experimented on yet again by this Mao and their corporation, and being injected with this stuff and being turned into these sort of semi-controllable creatures.
Yeah. Because of this disease that they have.
So yet again, you're like
susceptible.
Wait, so why is Venus pulsing, and is Venus behind this? Are they controlling Mao? Is it somehow controlling the corporation? Is this some side thing? Is the protomolecule being manipulated? And so Holden gets involved because he's pissed off that here's another protomolecule thing. He thinks it's not from Venus, and he's right. And the only person who has a piece of it is Fred Johnson. And how dare that bastard Fred Johnson use the stuff when I specifically told him I would give it to him, and if he did not use it. But Fred didn't use it, but James doesn't know that. And that gets them all pissed off. That gets James to Ganymede, and that's how he ends up picking up Bobby, getting involved with Prax, and again, trying to save the daughter, and blabbing anybody who will listen to the whole problem what's going on at the same time.
Yep, exactly. And now another cool thing that they did in this book that was original to this book was this is the first time you see the laws of physics all messed up.
Right.
So everybody has ships around Venus because everybody wants to know what the hell's going on Venus, and nobody can figure it out. So the UN has ships, and Mars has ships, and the OPA has ships, and they've all got scientific vessels trying to probe the clouds and figure what happened. And something comes out of Venus, approaches one of the Earth ships, and literally takes it apart bolt by bolt while all the other ships are watching.
Right, just disassembles
it just disassembles itself. So the people are all like getting explosively decompressed as their ship just completely comes apart around
them.
And Avasarala is like zooming in, like, oh my God, look at the bolts. And the bolts are like unscrewing themselves, and the whole thing just like explodes like a diagram. Everybody dies, and then it puts it back together again.
Right. So
so something is going on Venus, and it's really, really not good. It looks like it's not. I thought this was an awesome example of setting up. I wouldn't say like a straw man argument, but making it look like this thing on Venus was this awful thing because it was doing all this stuff. But in retrospect, you look back, you're like, oh, okay, so it's connected to all the other protomolecule in the solar system, but it wasn't controlling that stuff.
Right.
And it wasn't trying to kill those people on that spaceship. It needed to know what was going on with the people that were surrounding it.
It was doing research, right. It was just figuring out. it's a great ending. So basically, through the whole book, Holden, of course,
the ending is awesome.
He puts together. They take out Mao, right?
Yeah.
And so that story arc.
All the bad guys in the UN get taken down, and Avasarala ends up because she's the sort of like the power behind the throne, second in command, sort of, and she's being manipulated out of power, and she doesn't know it until halfway through the book.
Right.
And so she wins her political struggle. She ends up on top in the UN, and they take out Mao. Holden has a great scene at the end of the book where they really put Mao behind bars and get that whole thing solved. And Avasarala's plot is important because she basically prevents all-out war through the course of the book. So by the end of Caliban's War, things seem to be okay, but the twist at the end, of course, is that awesome. Venus decides to do something and launches what turns out to be a giant ring, like space station ring,
a giant like Halo size. For people who play the Halo, like Halo size ring floating around near Venus, and it's like, what the hell's that? And that's kind of the end of book 2.
Yeah, and it launches it out into the solar system, and everybody's like, "Oh my god!" And it's basically scoured the entire surface of Venus for the materials to make this stuff.
Right.
It launches out, and James Holden's like, "Oh my god! Now what are we gonna do?" And who should show up behind him but Ghost Joe Miller?
Yes, Miller shows up and is like, "Hey,
well, that can't be good." And he turns around, and is like, "Oh my god, it's Joe Miller!"
And that's pretty much the end of book 2. Yeah. So that's the end of Caliban's War. How did you feel at the end of Caliban's War?
I loved it. I found the ending of all of the primary subplots was really fulfilling and fit in with the universe. I thought there was still sacrifices that were being made. It wasn't like, oh, Rosie at the end, but you really get like a moment with Jules Pierre Mao.
Yep.
You want Avasarala to win.
Yep.
You want James Holden. You're kind of like, you like him, but they never set him up as like the big hero.
You never really loved James Holden.
No, you're more like he's a good man.
He's not an anti-hero. Yeah, he's not an anti-hero. He's a good guy.
Yeah.
But for some reason, you never really the books aren't written to get you to love him.
Right. Exactly.
He's sort of like a guy who's doing his own thing. He's a good guy, but he's not like
all he wants to do is be. He's kind of like Mal Reynolds.
Yeah.
In Firefly, because all he wants to do is have his ship, have his little business, and be left alone and do the right thing. That's all he wants.
Right. But I loved Avasarala, and I liked her character, and she was a very unique character, I thought. And I also like Bobby a lot. Yeah. I was disappointed that she didn't really appear in the third book, but
Now, an interesting thing in the third book, of course, is that you have more Martian Marines.
Yes.
Was there any point where you felt like one of them was going to be her?
No, I'm glad they didn't, because it would have seemed...
Me too, but was there a moment when you thought it might?
Yes, I thought it might.
I thought that was an awesome thing that they did too.
The only nod to her was that James Holden knew the capabilities of the suit and referenced Bobby several times, like reminded him of Bobby.
And at one point, he actually says he wishes one of these guys was Bobby.
Right. So it was a cool nod to that. And I found myself missing Avasarala a lot. I knew she wouldn't be in the third book. It would have been hard to do too. But the great thing about the third book was they create another Avasarala-like character in the preacher lady.
Yep.
She very much reminded me of Avasarala. I think they kind of used the same character style for her, and I really liked her a lot because she's sort of the moderator. She's a different person. You can tell she's not the same character exactly, but I like that. I liked her being there again, and I had a lot of fun with her as well.
Yep. Her name was Anna.
Yes, and that brings us to Abaddon's Gate.
Yes, Abaddon's Gate. Now, Abaddon's Gate, interestingly enough, I liked it. I liked it a lot. I don't want to say that I didn't like it a lot, but I don't know. You talk about it for a second.
So Stephen, at Abaddon's Gate, what's interesting is, remember we mentioned briefly there was that giant spaceship the Mormons built. Well, the Mormons had the OPA build 2 of them.
No. It's
was
the
it
same
2?
one.
Was it the same one? I thought they had 2.
Yeah, no, they have to. They send out their entire fleet to fetch it after it
that's
arrows.
Right. I thought they made 2 though for some reason. But anyway, they tried to build 2 and one of them blew up or something. Anyway. Well, they got this giant ship, and the thing that's unique about this giant ship is that most spaceships in this universe use their thrust to. There's no artificial gravity, so they use their thrust, the acceleration of the ship, to give gravity. So all the ships are built. The floors are perpendicular to the direction of thrust, and so when your ship's accelerating, you can stand on the floor, and when in the middle of your flight, your ship spins around and starts decelerating, you stand on the floor also.
Very much like the science we understand now.
Exactly. Right. Exactly the science we understand. Well, so the only way to get gravity is either thrust or you spin like in a space station.
Yeah.
So the idea behind this giant ship that Mormons built, the Nauvoo, was you're going to launch it, and it's not going to accelerate all the time because it's going to be traveling for generations, literally, to another star. So they built a spinning midsection with a giant built out to be like a giant habitat, right? So there's places to farm and all that stuff inside the ship,
which is very much like Ringworld and
it's all that kind of stuff,
or Babylon 5,
but very realistic, sort of near now technology you could sort of imagine, right?
It's the stuff that we kind of like can wrap our minds around.
We can see ourselves in 100 years from now doing that.
We can't really, but we let it suspend.
Yeah. Other than questions of degree, like how fast the ships can go, all the technology they have, if we don't have it, we understand it.
We know how to build it,
which is very cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So they got the ship. The OPA commandeers it. Now, meanwhile, there's this perception that between the last book and Abaddon's Gate, everybody and their cousin wants to know what the hell's going on with this ring. So everybody sends out a fleet to go watch the ring. Earth's got one there. Mars has got one there. The OPA wants to have one there, and they don't really have a fleet. So what they do is they take this giant spaceship and they turn it into a battleship.
They actually turned it into a dreadnought.
They do, but right from the get-go, they make it very clear that not
all is well on the
They didn't really have the time to do this the right way. So they slapped a railgun in it or two, but they're not really well anchored. And if they fired the railgun, it might rip the whole ship apart. They're not really sure.
Nice.
So there's all these issues. So it looks scary.
It looks vicious from the outside.
It looks awesome. So the OPA is sitting there outside the ring along with everybody else trying to look bad arse, right? And they introduced a bunch of new characters. Bull, who's Fred Johnson's sort of pick, but they've established very nicely in the first couple books, there's this political issue between Belters and the inner planets. Yep. Belters do not like or trust Earthers, vice versa. There's a lot of racism going on there. So Bull is a human. They're all humans, but Earthers, right? Earther. So when Fred Johnson picks...
He was a sergeant under Fred Johnson when Fred Johnson came out.
So Johnson picks a politically correct person for the captain, who's not necessarily the most competent person, but he's politically correct choice.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, he puts Bull in as not even the XO. He puts him in as the chief of security.
Well, he did put him in as the XO, but the political people in the OPA pushed even harder, and he couldn't even do that. So he gets removed from that and becomes the third in command, which on a ship is the security officer.
Right, and Fred pretty much says, hey, Bull, make this work.
Yep.
And knowing that Bull's really the highest-ranking competent person on the ship. The XO actually is not incompetent either, but the captain
but
turns out...
she doesn't have the experience. Nobody knew she was going to be competent.
The XO was green, and the captain turned out to be kind of a waffling idiot.
Captain Bligh kind of guy.
Yeah, right, exactly. So that's your one major character is Bull. Then you got Anna, who we already mentioned is the Methodist pastor, who you right from the beginning, you figure out that she's pretty much a badass for what she does.
Not in a combat way.
No,
in a personal fortitude.
In a personal fortitude, exactly. Well said.
Yeah.
And then you've got Clarissa Mao's the other interesting character, and she's really cool.
Very interesting.
Here they introduce, so they've done a great job of like picking 2 or 3 elements of the universe and just sort of building it out each book. So the first book was space travel and spaceships. The second book was like Marines and politics. The third book they introduced, like Clarissa Mao chicks had like biological implants. Yeah. And she can touch the roof of her mouth and circle her tongue a certain way, and it activates these special glands that have been planted in her body that generate all kinds of endorphins and make her super fast, and like time feels like it slows down for her, and she can do all kinds of combat moves, and she's super strong. But after about 2 or 3 or 10 minutes of this, it all turns off, and she goes into her body just like
goes into a
crashes.
And loses consciousness.
She loses consciousness. She starts to cry. She goes all emotional. Her body's not designed to do that. So there's a cost for this.
Can you go back to that whole thing about her mouth and her tongue? No,
right.
Keep going.
She's totally hot. So you might have caught her last name is Mao.
Yeah, she's a homicidal maniac.
She's pissed off because this bastard Jim Holden put her daddy in jail.
She's got daddy
so
issues.
So she's poor little rich girl turned into sci-fi ninja.
Yeah.
Basically, is her shtick. So she's out there spending all of her money, kitting herself out as a badass ninja chick with biological implants, plus spending all of her money to totally frame the crap out of Jim Holden. She doesn't want him dead. She wants him to be a total complete.
Wants to take away everything he's ever earned for himself.
History to write
ruin
him
his
as
name and then kill him.
Yes. So she sets up Jim. She does this whole thing to set up to the fact that he's going to be at the gate with the rest of these people. She plants bombs on the other ships and sets a recording and sets an imagery and sets a whole fake message from Jim Holden. So it looks like Jim Holden has blowing up these other ships and is taking credit for it and saying, no one will ever have this gate. I'm taking over the entire thing. And, just try and stop me. Humanity can't handle it. I am the only person from humanity that can be the savior of humanity. And kind of paints him as this total jerk.
Megalomania.
Right. And so she sets up this whole thing, but she's having the whole book, though, as she's doing this. So, again, another great character development. She starts out as clearly an evil son of a bitch.
Yep.
And she totally she starts having these moral issues as she goes along. At one point where she's obviously already killed a ton of people, in the middle of the book, she kills one person that she just can't get past.
Yep.
She kills this one person who's teaching her how to be a mechanic.
Who's a friend.
A
nice person.
Yep. Well, he wasn't even really a friend. He was just a nice guy, right?
Well, he was the only friend she had on that ship at that point.
What happened was he started to suspect something was wrong, and if he kept his investigation, he'd figure out she was sabotaging ships.
Yeah.
So she kills him, but she immediately feels guilty about it.
Yep.
And starts to question all of her moral judgment. And what's great is you sort of see this coming in the end of the book, but they do a really good job of her turning from total jerk to someone that not only does Jim Holden have to work with, but actually ends up saving the whole friggin' day.
Yeah.
Which is pretty awesome. So she's a really interesting character as well.
Yeah. To me that was an in-depth psychological study.
Oh yeah, it really was.
Because that wasn't just I want to kill him, I want to kill him, I want to kill him. I don't want to kill him.
No.
It was she went from I want to kill him because he's done all this stuff and it doesn't matter if I die because if I die killing him, my daddy will know that that's why I died and he'll think it's good. And then over the whole course of the book, she starts to doubt the sanctity of her father, and then she starts to doubt everything she's ever believed in, and then she starts to doubt whether she even has a place in the universe, and then she starts to doubt what's good and what's bad. I mean, and then she ends up at exactly the right place at the right time, at that pivotal moment in history when you need somebody to give events a nudge, and she has a completely well-founded, concrete reason in her character for giving it the nudge that it needs.
Yep. And I loved how Anna kept it, sort of became an influencing part with that.
Yep.
And there was so much great character development there. It was so believable. And even though near the end you kind of knew that was probably going to be what saved the day or part of what saved the day, it still worked. It was just great writing. It was great character development. And what makes this book so great, I think, is that all the characters evolve.
Yeah.
Even Miller after he's dead.
Right, exactly.
Which is great. Go ahead, Craig.
So I was just going to say really quickly, so Holden didn't want to go to the ring. It's as far as away he wants to be, but because of what's her name, Clarissa Mao, he ends up at the ring, and then then he gets framed exactly as Russ said. So his only hope is to retreat into the ring because everybody's trying to kill him because they're all convinced he's this bad guy. So he goes into the ring, and they're all standing around going, you know what? Let's just go in after him. So they all go in after him. And what they found out before they even went in there is, for some reason, when you go through the ring, there's no stars. It's all blackness, and no object can go faster than 600 feet per second.
Yeah. Very slow speed.
And it's a very slow speed for spaceships. Right. And so they're all crawling around, and nobody knows why you can't go any faster than that. And there's a space station, like this huge 5-kilometer long spherical space station in the middle of this space. And they realize that what they're looking at is, and that's why I like the original name of this book was Dandelion Sky, which I thought was awesome, because what you're looking at is actually like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of rings, just like the one they just traveled through, all set up in a sphere around this giant space station. Yep. And so it looks like you're inside a dandelion looking up. And around the space station is all this junk and all this stuff that's gone through the ring previously. And what you find out is you find out the big secret. And of course it's Jim Holden who it's Jim Holden who goes down and finds it out. You find out the proto-molecule is not a weapon. It's actually this invention of an ancient galaxy-spanning empire. And what they do is they launch it to all these new places, and it takes whatever planet is suitable to it and creates a gate so that this empire can now travel to, because these are like stargates.
Kind of like Stargate, a little Stargate.
Exactly. And so that billions of years ago they were going to come to Earth, but it misfired or whatever. And what you learn next is something started to eat the Empire. Some outside force started to destroy the Empire, attack it on all these different systems that it owned. And the station is like this semi-sentient station that sort of ruled over or controlled the Empire, or was logistically in charge of the Empire, and started. Before it started closing gates, it has the power to actually launch these bolts into the gates that destroy the entire system that the gate leads to. And so Jim Holden learns all this stuff, and then what it eventually did was shut down all the gates. And the reason the one to Earth works is it just built itself and they show up. And the reason that things can only go 600 miles a second is because the station has decided that anything that goes faster than that is a weapon. So it doesn't want any weapons fired in its sphere of influence. They call it the slow zone. And so everything starts to evolve, and all the fleets are there. They're jam-packed together, and you realize that the danger that's there is not this ancient civilization. It's actually the humans that they brought with them.
Right. And I just loved what I liked about this ending in particular was that, so many sci-fi books, when they get to this epic alien encounter for humanity kind of situation, they go 2001.
Yeah.
They go all esoteric and super abstract. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I mean, it happened in, even Mass Effect did it. I mean, the video game, they get into this like really weird space where it's just like this total wacky thing. The other book we read, Craig, was like that too.
Oh God, the one that had all the religious titles.
It just got totally crazy. Which I can, I get that it has its place, but it was cool here because it basically turned out that, all this stuff was just technology for getting around, and was an ancient AI whose job it was to be kind of like a traffic cop and make sure that everybody obeyed the speed limit, uses the gates wisely, and that no bad things infected the gate network and wiped everybody out.
Yeah.
Right. Which is a pretty smart safeguard when you think about it, because if you're going to connect a bunch of universes together, you don't want to make it easy to use that thing to wipe things out. So it makes it even more likely these aliens were really pretty good guys, right? Because they didn't launch weapons at everybody.
Right.
So the problem is that if they perceive you as a threat, they fire basically fireballs through your gate and blow up your sun.
Yeah.
So you don't want to upset them. And that's where the big finale comes in, because one faction of the humans on the ship decide this thing needs to be turned off from our universe, so we're going to blow our own gate back to Earth up.
Yeah.
And the other
they're going to blow up the station first,
right,
and then they think that's going to shut off the gate.
And the other faction realize, because they figure out that their communication laser can ignore the speed limit and damage things. But meanwhile, the other faction of humans, because of Jim Holden talking to Miller, figures out, no, the real problem is you got to turn everything off and prove to the station you're not a threat. Otherwise, it will fire a fireball or whatever it is through the gate and blow up your sun. And by the way, your laser's not going to do diddly squat to anything. So yeah, but you'll prove you're hostile. That's all it's going to do. So that's when the big final battle comes on board on the giant epic ship.
The Behemoth.
The Behemoth, because everybody goes there because it's the only ship that can generate gravity when no one's moving at any kind of speed.
Because because on the space station, which is another cool thing, which Russ was talking about, the Marines go after Jim Holden, who's inside the space station, and they launch a grenade at him, and he gets saved by Joe Miller. Yeah. But the space station is like, a grenade goes much slower, but is still obviously a weapon. So it slows down the slow zone again, and like half the people die as all the spaceships go screeching to a halt, and now they're all stuck, and nobody's got any kind of gravity, and so that's what they all have to, like Russ said, they have to go to the Nauvoo Behemoth.
Yeah, they do a really good job with physics here again too, because they do the thing where, the reason people are getting hurt every time the speed limit gets dropped is because imagine you're driving in a car at 80 miles an hour, and nobody's wearing any seatbelts because you're all walking around a spaceship, and all of a sudden the car slows down to 10 miles an hour inside the space of half an inch.
Yeah.
Slap, you're all smacked into the windscreen and half the crew dies.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. So unless you're now they have the spaceships set up so that when you're in bed, you're in a crash couch. When you're at a cruise station, you're in a crash couch. But if you're walking around the hall or doing maintenance on the engine and that happens, you're pretty much dead.
Yeah.
So what was happening was the people that didn't happen to be in crash couches were just dead, badly hurt or dead. And so they're getting wounded, so we've got to stop. And the only place that can do any medical treatment is the only place with gravity. The only place with gravity is that giant ship that the OPA brought. So get everybody over there, start the thing spinning up in the center, and get everybody, get a medical thing going on.
Which is awesome, because the only way you can get gravity is to get the barrel spinning again, and the only way to get the barrel spinning is to take all your weapons off.
Right.
So that was awesome, too.
So that was a great scene. And then there was political conflict inside the ship, and it was just a great finale.
It was awesome. And it was an awesome way, because when you looked at the whole thing, humans were the enemies the whole time.
Yep.
Which was you go from this ancient, this awful, evil, tyrannid-like thing that's just eating everybody, and oh my god, and you realize that at every crossroads when something bad happened, it was people, and so there's a very, I wouldn't say Shakespearean, but there's a very deep, undercurrent that goes through this whole thing, which I thought was very intriguing.
It's very much we're our own worst enemy, and we basically found a new toy, and what do we do with it? We use it to kill ourselves. There we go. But in the very end, which is great, is it's pretty uplifting. The good guys essentially win, and the peace is restored to the station. The station is convinced, and Miller's able to shut it down and basically turn everything on for humanity to use the gates as they will, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you're pretty much, it's a very uplifting ending where hopefully everybody can fly out and explore, and the sides all work together here, and hopefully that gets back to the various governments, and maybe there can be a cooperative future for humanity going forward.
And as in an ironic twist, they've decided that Clarissa Mao needs to be returned to Earth for trial because she did kill all these people, even though she was essential in finally beating the true enemy, which was the political faction on the big battleship. But they've also decided that because she's killed so many people from every faction, there's no one of any faction that can be trusted transporting her to Earth, because whatever faction you give her to is going to kill her. Right. So they decide the only person who can be trusted is the guy she's been trying to kill all along. So she's put into James Holden's care, and he's not super thrilled about that.
No.
But he's like, okay, fine. Because what he's getting as a reward is basically the title to the Rocinante, because one of the many little threads that they were using to manipulate him was Mars was going to sue to try to get the Rocinante back. And so he's given a new mission. Go through that gate over there and see what's on the other side, and then come back, and then you can go to Earth. Right. So this book ends with him going, okay, Clarissa Mao, who's been trying to kill me for a whole book, you're on my ship, but you know what? Everybody trusts you not to go crazy anymore, so you'll be fine. But we have to go through that gate and explore that system before we go back to Earth, and that's how it ends.
Right. And so it's really, I don't know, what did you think about the ending of the book and then the ending of this initial part of the trilogy, who originally was going to be the whole thing, but now, of course, they've talked about making more. But
exactly. I thought it was awesome. I thought a little bit of me was like, I wish it had just ended, but nothing can just end, I guess, nowadays. And if you've got a good franchise that's going, you want to just keep it going.
Yeah, but it also, to me, it's definitely got room for a sequel, because you got the guy basically in Star Trek.
Totally. The way it ended, it's an awesome way for.
He's in Star Trek mode, exploring strange new worlds. But at the same time, that also could be an ending, right? Where Jim Holden's got his ship, he's off to explore. So you could argue it's either way. It was a nice way to do it because it gives him room.
Yeah.
I'm curious what they do next, because I don't know if a book just about Jim Holden would hold up. He's never been my favorite central character. He's a great character. I love him, but. Right. I don't want a book just about him.
So I would agree. I think Jim Holden is supposed to be this everyman character, which is not a character that you root for necessarily.
Right.
It's not a character that you feel so engaged in, because he's almost too recognizable.
Yeah.
You're kind of like, yeah. I mean, I want him to win, but there's no moments really. Although he's got a couple.
Yeah.
But I agree with you that there can't be a book that is just the crew of the Rocinante and Clarissa Mao in an alien system.
Right.
But as you say, it's very Star Trekky, because there's hundreds, if not thousands, of gates now that are all open.
Right.
And there's this massive evil empire out there that was killing this empire, and they're still out there somewhere, and nobody knows which gates they're through.
Yep.
And you've got Joe Miller, who is now the avatar of the Ring Station. That basically he's sort of like the human, and only Jim Holden can see him, but he's basically like the conscience of that whole AI system now. So I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in place to make to go with a book, but I don't know. I can also see where if it goes in a certain way, I will be less intrigued than if it. Like, I think what they did well was really complex plots with a really complex universe, and weaving it all together with multiple subplots, And so I don't think it would work well if it was just a little intimate adventure novel.
Yeah. Also fantastic character development. And that's the other
amazing character
and they weren't afraid to introduce new characters, and that's, I think, what made it work. So if they stick with a small crew on a ship, they're going to run out of...
Right. And never too many of the characters either.
Right.
I mean, it was always, focusing on 3 or 4 new characters. And before we go, because we are getting late and we're getting looks from the Dunkin' Donuts guy.
Right.
The writers did this awesome thing where they had a short story between each novel. So you had Leviathan Wakes, and then between Leviathan Wakes and Caliban's War, you had the short story The Butcher of Anderson Station, which was the story of how Fred Johnson went out there, what happened at Anderson Station, and how he ended up siding with the people he was supposed to be attacking. And then between Caliban's War and Abaddon's Gate, you had the short story Gods of Risk, which was actually about what's her name? Bobby.
Right.
Which was awesome. And it was and you learn all about Mars and the different Mars cultures in that one. So each of these short stories even fleshed out the universe more, and it sort of like tided you over until the next novel came out. So I just thought it was great.
Yeah, I really
the way those
series.
Two did the worked also.
It was awesome. It's a very it's a very, very good series. They are fantastic at character development.
Yeah.
Dialogue's great. The writing style is fantastic. I never once got lost or confused, even though it's a very complex plot when you look back on it.
Yeah. Exactly. It was it when you look back on it, it's really complex, but when you were going through it, it was all very clear.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, as you said, when we were reading Abaddon's Gate, there's a lot of, oh my gosh, did they really, you know.
So it's really full of those.
So,
moments.
Stephen, unfortunately, we spoiled the entire series for you now.
Yeah, I can't. I'm so mad at you guys. It's terrible.
No.
It's really your passion for this obviously mirrors passion of gamers and things like that. So I'm very excited about this series. I will consider picking this up as a next potential read, maybe on my way to Essen or was that future
or from Essen? I don't know.
From Essen, depending on where I am. But anyway, no, it really sounds interesting. I mean, and actually mostly when you told me that it's now been picked up, option for TV. I mean, that's awesome. I mean, because I
think it'll make an awesome TV.
It sounds like it. I mean, and very doable with current quote unquote technology, understandable technology versus Star Trekian technology, which I love too. But this is very approachable for more of a mass audience.
Well, I don't know. If we learn nothing from Gravity, it's that sometimes doing things that are realistic is harder than doing things that aren't.
I didn't see Gravity, and it didn't look appealing.
It wasn't. Don't worry.
Yeah. So good. I'm glad I'm not seeing.
You're not losing. You didn't miss anything.
I'm sure we'll talk more about Gravity and achievements in gaming.
I'm sure you do.
I can't wait to hear about it. Should I go see it before then so we can talk about it?
Yes, because then you'll have. Oh, that'll be great. Because then future Stephen will have already seen Gravity, and then we can talk about it ahead of this segment.
Then we can go diss it. Okay. Good.
Yes. Great. All right.
Yeah. There you go.
Well, Stephen, thank you so much for joining us here in Dunkin' Donuts.
Yeah, thank you. And have a good trip, or hope you had a good trip to Germany.
Had one.
We'll have.
Whatever, but yes, it'll be great in Essen. And thank you for having me here.
No problem. And we look forward to having you on the main show here in about a week.
I can't wait for that. This is great.
Huzzah!
Right. Take care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for purchasing a D6G Lost Chapter. Supporting the show helps it grow.